So I just go.
Okay. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
All right. Good to see you all. We are back. We're continuing on through Deuteronomy. We're getting close to the end of Devarim. We went into chapter 30 a little bit last week. 6 verses. We're going to start at verse 11 this week. We'll do a little recap, just by reading. We'll start at the beginning of chapter 30 just as a recap. But this week's portion is HaMitzvah, which begins at chapter 30, verse 11. But like I said, we'll go back and read from 1 down through 11, which is really the beginning of this week's. But I want to get us into the context. So we're going to start at the beginning of the chapter. As always, we want to always, look and see how we are able to see Messiah, see the new covenant in the Torah, as well as, what the thing's actually dealing with. But we always want to look and see what the, the spiritual implications are that we find in these scriptures, right? Okay, so let us go now to Deuteronomy, and we'll read Deuteronomy 31 through 11. Let me pull that up over here and go from there. Hold on one second. Okay. All right. You want to I want to read from 1 to verse 11.
Repentance and forgiveness. And it shall be, when all these words come upon you, the blessing and the curse which I have set before you, and you shall bring them back to your heart among all the nations where Yah your Elohim drives you. And y'all shall turn back to Yah,
cursor at
your Elohim, and obey his voice, according to all that I command you today, with all your heart and with all your being, you and your children. Then Yah your Elohim shall turn back your captivity and shall have compassion on you. And he shall turn back and gather you from all the peoples where Yah your Elohim has scattered you. If any one of you are driven out to the farthest parts under the heavens, from there Yah your Elohim does gather you, and from there he does take you. And Yah your Elohim shall bring you to the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it. And he shall do good to you, and increase you more than your fathers. And Yah your Elohim shall circumcise your heart and the heart of your seed, to love Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being, so that you might live. And Yah your Elohim shall put all these curses on your enemies and on those who hate you, who persecute you. You shall turn back and obey the voice of Yah, and do all his commands, which I command you today. And Yah your Elohim shall make you have excess in all the work of your hand, and in the fruit of your body, and in the fruit of your livestock, and in the fruit of your ground for good. For Yah turns back to rejoice over you for good, as he rejoiced over your fathers. If you obey the voice of Yah your Elohim to guard his commands and his laws, which are written in the book of the Torah, if you turn back to Yah your Elohim with all your heart and with all your being. For this command which I am commanding you today, is not too hard for you, nor is it too far off.
Okay. So, again, just kind of a little recap. You know, we looked at some of these verses last week, but they, are relevant with where the chapter is going in terms of, we talked about the circumcision of the heart. We talked about the fact that in verse 6 that it says that Yahweh your Elohim shall circumcise your heart, right? It's going to be the Almighty that's doing this spiritual work inside of you, that's actually doing the cutting inside of you, that's bringing about this this change in you, and from starting from the inside and working out, dealing with your actions. So we see again, it's a common thing with the Almighty in terms of the idea of these conditional things. If you do this, then this, right? If you are obedient, then blessings will be the result of your obedience. If you're disobedient, curses will be the results of your disobedience, right?
That's right.
So when it gets down to verse 8, and it talks about the idea of what happens as a result of the disobedience. Verse 8, and you shall turn back. If you turn back, teshuvah, if you turn back and obey the voice of Yahweh and do all his commands, which I command you, then, all these blessings will come on you, right? This idea of repentance, this idea of turning, this idea of going away and coming back, right? So when it goes through all of that, I think that's important when it gets down to verse 11, where it says, we looked at, for this command which I'm commanding you today, it is not hard for you, nor is it far off. Now, when I looked at that initially, it seems as if, to me anyway, there's many, I'm not going to say many, but there's a few different. Well, first of all, let's deal with, before we jump too far ahead, let's deal with this word command, because this Torah portion is HaMitzvah, dealing with this command, right? So let's just break that down real quick before we go into this actual verse here. Let's see here. Okay, that word is mitzvah. Mitzvah, translated as command, whether heaven, human or divine. Collectively, the law. We think of the law of Yahweh. Sometimes we interchange all of the different words, and we talk about Torah and call that a law, and we talk about the mitzvah, we call that law. Torah really is instruction. Mitzvah is command. I guess we have kind of these differentiations, right? This is a command. This is law, ordinance, precept. Where's the word study? It can apply to the edicts issued by human beings, mostly like the king. The king establishes certain things or so on and so forth. That could be called mitzvah. That could be called command. And also can relate to general corpus of human precepts or a body of teachings. On the other hand, this expression can reference Elohim's commands in the Pentateuch or the Torah. This is its only usage. It does not refer to human commandments. In the singular, it may distinguish a certain command. Yet it appears most frequently in the plural to designate the entire corpus of the divine law and instructions. So when we're talking about here these commands, specifically this command, as it says here in verse 11, this command, I wasn't exactly sure right off the bat which command it was dealing with, because when as you're going down, is it talking about, like, we can't think about this, because this is what the people who put the Bible together decided was a good title for going down, right? So but when it's saying for this command which I command you today, this law, this commandment, these precepts that I'm commanding you today, it is not too hard for you, nor is it far off. Well, when we look at that, again, what would we say this is in regards to? What we just looked at? Because when we think about what we just looked at, we see this idea of first of all, we see a few things. We see the idea of blessings and curses. If you obey my voice and keep my commandments, you'll receive these blessings. And especially so, dealing with having this circumcised heart that he talked about over here in verse 6. We talked about the fact that these people who were about to go into the land, we talked about them and how the scriptures kind of differentiated them from their fathers, the people who died in the wilderness, in relation to the ones that were actually going into the land. How he made a covenant with them, and how the people who died, of obviously, they weren't part of that. So, and then we see this thing about the Most High actually circumcising the hearts of these people that's here and their seed as they go over in, right? So when we look at this here, and we see this verse down here in verse 11, where it talks about this idea of this command that's being commanded to you to this day, and how it's not too hard for you. It's easy for me to think about the idea of these commandments that the Most High is putting forth. It's easy for me to think about them not being hard if I'm connecting it to being in this place of having a circumcised heart. Outside of that, it seems like it is kind of hard. But connecting it to the above verses where it talks about them having this or being given this circumcised heart, I can see in that respect how it isn't hard. how it wouldn't be difficult. Another thing that we see here in terms of thinking about what it's talking about in terms of being too hard, something that definitely wouldn't be hard is this idea of repentance, this idea of turning back, right? It's laid out for us right there in terms of if you transgress, if you go astray, you're able to turn from your ways, as it says back in let's see what it says. I think it's 3 and 4. Then Yahweh your Elohim shall turn back your captivity. Let's go. Wait. Yeah, then Yahweh will turn back your captivity and shall have compassion on you, and he shall turn back and gather you from all peoples where your Elohim has scattered you. Right? So the whole scattering is as a result of disobedience and receiving curses. But if you're able to turn back, then he's able to gather you in again. Right? So this idea of verse 4, if any of you are driven out to the farthest parts under the heavens, from there, Yahweh, it says, your Elohim does gather you, and from there he does take you. Right? But it only takes for obedience. It only takes for you to turn back. So that when I look at that, it seems like that in relation to even just keeping commandments in general seems that's not difficult at all, right? Turning back to the Almighty, turning back is even less difficult, I would say, than that. I'm saying if the Most High is going to say that there is a thing that's not too hard for you and is not far off, I feel like the idea of returning is just my thoughts on the matter. It seems as if the idea of returning is easier, especially if we're talking about it from the perspective of these people here that he's speaking to specifically. I would say that it's easier. Returning is easier than maintaining from these people in this time at this place. Mainly because of the fact that when we look at this, I feel like it's always pointing us forward towards Messiah, where these people were, again, as we always talk about, these people were bound to dealing in their own strength. But like when we add verse 12, I'm saying that I don't believe that this is actually dealing with the commandments necessarily, but this idea of the loving kindness of Almighty and his accessibility to his people if they would only turn towards him. Based on what was behind, but based on also what is forward, like in verse 12, it is not in the heavens to say who shall ascend into the heavens for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it so that we can do it. If we think about this command, as it says right here, this command in verse 11, if we think about this command as actually being all of the commandments, when we think about the fulfillment of the new covenant, somebody literally did actually ascend into the heavens for us and brought it to us and caused us to hear it and do it. That's what literally happened with Messiah, right?
Yeah.
That's what literally happened. It is not in the heavens to say who shall ascend into the heavens for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it so that we do it. That's what it talks about in Ezekiel 36, where he's putting the law in our hearts and causing us to do it. So that's why I'm saying that here, this thing that's not difficult, this thing that's not far off, is not necessarily dealing with our ability to do the commandments, but repentance and the forgiveness that we receive from the Almighty. That's the thing that's not hard to do. That's the thing that's not far off. When you look at here, what's that word here? Let's see. I took it off of here. Let's go back to this here and look at this. Verse 11. See, the King James says it is not hidden. It is not hidden from thee, neither is it far off. I'm saying that the thing that's not hidden is the mercy of the Almighty, is forgiveness and your ability to turn back. Right? Because in regards to that, these things are and when you think about the fact that he's laying these things out for you, if you are obedient, then I'll bless you.
Right.
If you're disobedient, then you'll be cursed. But if you're being cursed and you turn back, which is repentance, if you turn back, then you'll receive the blessings again. This word here, hidden, perhaps to separate, that is distinguished, literally, figuratively. Great, to make difficult, to make wonderful, to accomplish. And again, I'm saying that, and I could be wrong, but I'm just saying this is how the way that I'm looking at it in terms of when we look at what was said and we look at what is said after this, the thing that I see, according to, first of all, what these people who are being spoken to here, the thing that's not hidden is the fact that the Most High is available to his people and not far off from his people if they would just turn to him, right? But when we get to the next verse, that's where, for me anyway, where it trips me up in terms of this commandment, meaning like all the commandments in general. Because it obviously was hard for them because they was never able to walk in it. All the commandments, I'm saying. That part was hard from them. And they literally did. When we look and see what Messiah did, this is it right here, right? So what we also could say is that is talking about the literal commandments, the Torah, all of the law, and this here is just all just prophetic then. So you can look at this different ways. You can look at this as being this commandment that it's talking about is not all the commandments. It's just what he just got finished talking about with this idea of being able to turn back to the Almighty in terms of our repentance, our ability to turn back, and the Most High's ability to forgive us. That's not hidden. That's not far off. Or the fact that this is talking about all the commandments, all of the laws, all of the precepts, they're not hidden because of the fact that this will actually happen. and the Most High will literally through his son Yeshua make these things available for us. Well, he had, that's what he's done. But they can't see that necessarily at this point. Right? They can't see that. All they see is, what they're looking at. So I'm saying we could look at that and kind of think about it from a spiritual perspective, but just from a natural perspective, I think that again, that thing that's not hidden, that thing that's not far off, is this idea of the accessibility to the Almighty as a result of repentance and turning away from sin and iniquities, right? Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do. One must understand that the nature that we are created in is to follow the design laws of Yah. And like you said, if we disobey them, we'll still be cursed just like our ancestors was. But the remedy to that is also in Exodus, and one should humble themselves and turn from their ways and seek Yah's face. He will hear them and heal the land. And no one's really doing that. So us as a whole, we must do that, through Yeshua. For it's already known that the laws itself does not save us, which is why the Messiah was incorporated and established that we can be reconciled back to Yah through him only. When people have I would say, not dislearned, but small lack of understanding what it means to be having the laws not being burdensome to us. They think it's done away with when it's really not. All Paul was really saying was that through Yeshua, the guilt of sin should not be carried among us to be burdensome, because we have a way of being repentant for it by repenting ourselves through Yeshua. Then the blessings will come. That's all I have to say. Shabbat shalom.
Okay, very good. All right, so let me see what we want to read down to.
Your wife is attempting to reach you on your cellular device.
Okay, so what I want to do is, I guess before we keep on going, thinking about this idea of when we look at these verses here and we think about the idea of repentance, and we think about the place of the law and the commandments, we think about our the condition of our hearts. When we look, at the Torah, the Torah always is pointing forward to Messiah. When we look at the so-called New Testament, those people were, they studied the so-called Old Testament. But when we think about Messiah and who he is and what he represents, especially in this context, in terms of how it's talking about having this this accessibility to the Almighty, and having this circumcised heart, and thinking about these things in kind of a new covenant perspective. I wanted to look at hold on, I didn't put the chapter and verses on that. Okay, hold on a second. Let me pull this up because I can't believe I copied this and I didn't put the chapters and verses here. This is Yochanan chapter 5, is it? Yeah. 30 self I'm able to do. Hold on one second here. Hold on one second here. Hisky, let me see that version you got there. That's what I have. This little mini Bible. I think it's John chapter 5 or 6. Can't tell because of the wording. Oh yeah. It's okay. Very good. 5:30. Yeah. It just became unrecognizable looking at it in the scriptures and then trying to find it in the King James. Okay.
Sometimes I do read a way different.
Yeah.
What's that, King James?
5:30. Okay, let's read. I want to read 30 down to, let's see. Let's see. To 40. Verse 30 down to 40.
30 down to 40?
Yeah.
Of myself, I am unable to do any matters as I hear. I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own desire, but the desire of the Father who sent me. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. There is another who bears witness of me, and I know that the witness which he witnessed of me is true. You have sent to John, and he bore witness to the truth. But I do not receive witness from man, but I say this in order that you might be saved. He was the burning and shining lamp, and for a while you wished to rejoice in his light. But I have a greater witness than that of John. For the works of the Father have given me to accomplish the works that I do. Bear witness of me, that the Father have sent me. And the Father who sent me, who bore witness of me, you have neither heard his voice at any time, nor seen his form. And you do not have his word stand in you, because you do not believe him whom he sent. You search the scriptures, because you think you possess everlasting life in them. And these are the ones that bear witness of me. But you do not desire to come to me in order to possess life. I do not receive esteem from men.
Oh, wait. 40 was where we was going.
So that's it.
So we read all that in the context and we see, but I wanted to kind of focus here in 39. You search the scriptures because you think you possess everlasting life in them, and these are the ones that bear witness of me. But you do not desire to come to me in order to possess life. Okay, so when we thinking about those, thinking about, first of all, back, we want to, in the back of our minds, have this idea of the fact that thinking about this commandment that I command you today is not too difficult for you, is not out of your reach. And thinking about that in terms of being kind of this accessibility that we actually have to the Almighty, especially thinking about it in the kind of new covenant context in terms of how what Yeshua does for us in terms of strengthening us through the Ruach HaKodesh and strengthening us and empowering us to be able to do those things which are pleasing to the Almighty through his power. When we think about Deuteronomy 30 verse 11, we really can think about the commandments of the Almighty. Oh, I thought that was your feet. We really can think about the commandments of the Almighty and how they're not too difficult for us. If we look at 1 John in chapter 5, 1 John chapter 5, I think it's like 1 and 3, 1 through 3. Whosoever believes that Messiah, that Yeshua is the Messiah, is born of Elohim, and everyone that loves him that begot loved him also that is begotten of him. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim, when we keep his commandments. For this is the love of Elohim, that we keep his commandments, and his commandments are not grievous. They're not too hard. They're not burdensome to us.
Right.
They're not difficult. It's kind of the natural progression of your life. That's the proof that you are born of Elohim, that his commandments are in your heart. They're changing you from the inside, and these things are not too difficult, and his ways are not out of reach. But Messiah, when we look in John chapter 5, he's talking to these people who they search in the scriptures because they think, because you think you possess everlasting life in the scriptures. And the scriptures are the ones that bear witness of me, is what he's saying. But you do not desire to come to me in order to possess life. I think it's some interesting things going on here that I wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
And we still talk about Deuteronomy 30. We still talking about these commandments not being afar off, but we just looking at it from another perspective now, because we talking about the fact that Messiah is here talking to these people and saying that they're looking in the scriptures, looking for everlasting life in the scriptures, but they're not connecting the everlasting life of the scriptures to the man there, Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
They're missing out on something, right? But remember, the commands of Yahweh are not hidden. They're not dark. They're not unable to be understood. Messiah here is not saying that there's no life in the scriptures. That's not what he's saying. He's not saying necessarily that there's not everlasting life in the scriptures. What he is saying is that they're not recognizing that this everlasting life actually is connected to Yeshua.
Mm-hmm.
what he is saying is that the scriptures is actually are actually point to Messiah, who is the life. I wanted to look at we could look at things like was that 14:6? Hold on. John 14:6. That says, Yeshua said to him, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. Right? So Yeshua is the life. But he just told us that the scriptures, he said that the scriptures bear witness of him. We understand that. We understand what life is. We understand that Yeshua is the life through the scriptures. The scriptures point us towards Messiah. He's talking to these people who, if they were actually looking at the scriptures correctly, should have been able to recognize Yeshua in the scriptures. This way is bringing out. It was probably way too heavy for those people at that time. But for us, we should be able to look at this and get a better picture. And understanding that when we look back at the scriptures in the so-called Old Testament, those things are showing us Messiah. They're pointing us to Messiah. That's what he's trying to tell these people over here. And again, if we think about this idea of the Most High and his commandments not being afar off from us, he shows us, how that is so. He shows us how that is so through his son Yeshua. When we're able to properly look at the scriptures and understand that he always was trying to show us Messiah, he was always making a way for us to be able to be reconciled and come together unto him. But, if we were to get stuck in like how these Pharisees at this time are looking at the law as if it is this other thing, instead of looking at it from a spiritual perspective as what Yeshua is trying to bring out here, just like Paul talks about the law being a schoolmaster that leads us to Messiah. It has to be this thing that's taking us to a place. If we was to say, if somebody was to give us a map, if someone wants to give us a map that takes us to this beautiful place, and we begin to kind of venerate the map over the place, the map over the destination. The map is always going to be the map, but the map is pointing us in a direction to get to a place. And if we think about, I feel like if we think about the law and put it in its place, we need it because it's the map. It tells you which direction to go. But the goal is not the map. The goal is where the map is taking you to.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. Like, a lot of people focus on the map and not the destination. It's like, what are we trying to accomplish? What are we trying to get to? And they focused on nuances of the map. When the map is going to get you there, if you really closely look at it, and say make a right turn here, left turn there. That's the main things to focus on. But they'd be like, oh, the left wasn't getting right. They should have said left before this verse or this part, the instructions of it. You know, they focus on the wrong parts of it and don't get the whole point of the map.
Right.
I hear you on that.
So that's what Messiah was talking to these people about. You're sitting up there looking for everlasting life in the scriptures, but the scriptures is talking about me. And I'm sitting right here. Okay, let's look at let's look at a couple other verses.
Yeah, she was all through the book. He said it's written of me. All through it.
Let's see here. Romans 7:12 says, so that the Torah truly is set apart, and the command set apart and righteous and good. So again, when we look at what Yeshua was saying back there to the people in terms of how he said that you search the scriptures because you think you possess everlasting life in them. He's not putting down the scriptures, because we see in Romans 8, 7 and 12, the scriptures are holy and good. He's not putting down the scriptures. He's just letting them know that they're not looking at the scriptures correctly. Because if the scriptures are bearing witness of him, he is everlasting life. The scriptures is about him. So he's not saying that there's not everlasting life in the scriptures. What he's saying is that they are not looking or finding everlasting life in the scriptures because they're not finding him in the scriptures. Why did I get this verse here? Let's look at I don't know why I got this verse. What's that? Baruch 3, 9 and 14. See if I can pull that up over here. I might not have those over here. Oh, okay. Three, verse 9. Okay, there it goes. Read that from 9 to 14 there.
Hear, O Israel, the commandments of life. Give ear to understand wisdom. How is it, O Israel, that you are in your enemy's land, that you have become old in a strange country, that you are defiled with the dead, that you are counted with those who go down into the grave? You have forsaken the fountain of wisdom. For if you walked in the ways of Yah, you should have dwelt in peace forever. Learn where is wisdom, where is strength, where is understanding, that you might know also where is strength of days and life, where is the light of the eyes and peace.
Okay, very good. So when we think about this idea, again, we're keeping in the back of our minds this idea of the commandments of Yahweh not being difficult and not being far off. When we think about what it is that Yeshua alone, who is life, who tried to tell these Pharisees, he tries to tell these experts of the law something that they wasn't able to see, right? He is showing us how we can look at Deuteronomy 30 verse 11 and that verse be absolutely true in us by understanding that he is the law in our hearts. He is the way that we're able to walk in the way of Elohim. if we look at this right here, verse 13, for if you had walked in the way of Elohim, you should have dwelt in peace forever. Your way to a life of peace is through Yeshua. And we know that in Yeshua now we're able to walk in the way of Elohim. Right? So we had to be able to put these two things together, not just to say that if I just am able to do these things, that I'm able to receive now this everlasting peace. Right? Because we're able to see in history, the people as a whole, there was a problem with those people, right? Because they were missing the most necessary ingredient, who is Messiah. But at the same time, throughout the scriptures, when we're able to look at the scriptures on a whole, we're able to see that the scriptures is always trying to get us to see this missing ingredient up until the time that Messiah comes on the scene, and letting us know that was the piece right there. That's the part that the people need, so that he's the life, he's the way and the truth and the life. So when we look here where it's talking about this idea of learn where is wisdom, where is strength, where is it? In Yeshua. Where is understanding? In Yeshua. That you may know also where is length of days and life. Where is the light of the eyes and peace? Where is that? It's in Yeshua. And being in Yeshua then causes you to, and strengthens you to be able to walk in his ways. And as it said in John chapter 5 and verse 3, where you're able to do his commandments and they will not be grievous to you, being born of Elohim. Right? When we look at John 5 and 1 John 5 and 3, we see how this verse in Deuteronomy makes all kinds of sense. We don't even got to think about what it could be talking about. If we think about it in regards to Yeshua, it becomes just an unthinkable thing, right? We don't even got to think about it. Let's go back. Oh, I got to go off of these verses. Okay, let's keep on going down here. Let's see some more things.
Ready? Deuteronomy 30:11.
Oh, wait. You know what? Let's go back to, before we do that, let's go back to let's go back to John real quick. Finish that up here before we go back. John Yochanan 5. We read the 40. We want to look at 41. Okay, read down to 46.
I do not receive esteem from men, but I know you, that you do not have the love of Elohim in you. I have come in my Father's name, and you do not receive me. If another come in his own name, him you will receive. How are you able to believe when you are receiving esteem from one another, and the esteem that is from the only Elohim you do not seek? Do not think that I shall cause you to the Father. There is one who accuses you, Moshe, in whom you have set your expectation. For if you believe Moses, you would have believed me, since he wrote about me. That's powerful right there. That's powerful. John 5:43 is one of my favorite ones right there.
So again, when we look at this again, Yeshua's teaching these people. Well, I don't know how much he's teaching them because I don't know if they believed him or not. But he's giving them some powerful things right there in terms of, and it's definitely something that we're able to look at and see that Moses spoke of Yeshua.
But you know what, too? It's hard for them to see it because they're living it. It's like somebody coming up to you, like you got this manual. They don't got the New Testament at this point. Mm-hmm. It's live happening to them, mm-hmm. And I'm doing what it say here in this book. This is me. Yeah. So it's like, what you mean this is you? So it's hard not to have that resistance, you know, especially with people who are in this book constantly and they're not necessarily looking for somebody to come and say that to them or be above them or is younger than them, and to be like, yeah, this is me. I'm telling you what it is, you know. So I can get their perspective, but in hindsight, you know, us looking at it, it's plain like that's what it said right after the river.
That's funny that you said that. That's funny that you brought the age thing into it because you don't really think about that, but if Yeshua is like in his early 30s, like he's like this is like this young whippersnapper coming around here talking about what you talking about. You still wet behind the ears a little bit.
You've been doing this.
But when we think about the law and what Paul begins to talk about, how he begins to speak about the law and how the law, let's look over at Romans real quick. Because I don't want to just make it seem like I think that we're able to think about things from a spiritual perspective for whatever reason, but we can see, not knowing why the whys of it, but we can see and understand that the way that they was looking at it was from what had to have been from a carnal perspective of why they wasn't seeing it. Why they wasn't able to see Messiah in it, because they wasn't looking at it from a spiritual perspective. What is that? 7:14. 7:14. We looked at 7:12, where it says, where the law is holy and the commandment holy and just and good. But drop down to 14, for we know that the law is spiritual, but I am carnal, sold unto sin. But if we look over in chapter 8, let me just pull it up over here. We look over at chapter 8. Romans 8. Just start at 1 and go down to 6. Romans 8, 1 through 6. Yeah, 1 through 6.
There is then now no condemnation to those who are in HaMashiach Yeshua, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Ruach. For the Torah of the Ruach of the life in the Mashiach Yeshua has set me free from the Torah of sin and of death. For the Torah being powerless in that it was weak through the flesh, Elohim have sent his own son in the likeness of flesh of sin, and concerning sin, condemned sin in the flesh, so that the righteous of the Torah should be complete in us, who do not walk according to the flesh, but according to the Spirit. For those who live according to the flesh set their minds on the matters of the flesh, But those who live according to the Ruach, spirit, the matters of the spirit. For the mind of the flesh is death, but the mind of the Ruach is life and peace.
Okay, so when we think about the idea of setting our minds to the matters of the flesh as opposed to the matters of the spirit, there was a problem with what those people was doing, those people that Yeshua was talking about. But meanwhile, they was looking at the scriptures. He was kind of condemning them, but they was looking at the scriptures. But it wasn't as if there was a problem with the scriptures. It was a problem how they were dealing with the scriptures. So when we think about this, when we look at the scriptures, we have to be looking at them not according to the flesh and setting our minds according to the matters of the flesh, doing this or that, these physical things. But what are the spiritual implications of these things? If they would have looked at the spiritual implications of the Torah, they would have been able to see Messiah. Some of the people it was them high and lofty ones who wasn't able to. The other people was able to see Messiah there. Even when you break them down, right? He's getting ready. If we was to look in John, that's chapter 5. We look in chapter 6. Yeshua gets to a place where most of his disciples went away from him because he started talking about eating my body and drinking my blood. Right? Because they're thinking about it according to the flesh, and he's talking about doing it according to the spirit. So when we think about these things, again, we have to be able to look at the scriptures and think about them. We consider the physical. Obviously, we can't like move it aside, but to be able to know what it is that is really trying to show us. And again, if we're trying to find everlasting life in the scriptures, we have to be able to see it in, how it relates to Messiah. Not to say that we won't find it, everlasting life, that is, but we have to be able to find Messiah in it in order for us to be able to see that. Right? So we see that Moses spoke of Yeshua. Right? And these things are not separate from each other. In fact, they coincide with one another. One actually is a progression of the other, right? Okay, so let's go back over now to Deuteronomy. We're going to go back to Deuteronomy where we were. Chapter 30. Chapter 30, Deuteronomy, verse 12. Okay, so let's read 12 down through 14.
It is not in the heavens to say, who shall ascend into the heavens for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it so that we do it. Nor is it beyond the sea to say, who shall go over the sea for us and bring it to us and cause us to hear it so that we do it. For the word is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, to do it. Okay, good. So again, when we think about this in terms of, like, we know, like he said what he said, and he said, for the word is very near you. The word is very near you. But when we think about John chapter 1, verse 1, the word is Messiah, right? The word is Yeshua.
the people's ability, even if we look at it from in terms of these people here, the ability for these people to succeed in the ways of the Almighty wasn't far away because the Most High was with those people. Right? The ability for these people to succeed and strive and progress, the ability was right there because the Almighty was with those people at that time, walking with them through going through the wilderness, right? But again, when we think about what Yeshua said about the Torah and what he said about Moses, Moses wrote about Yeshua. Moses wrote about Yeshua. That's what Yeshua said. So when we think about this, the word being near you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. I wanted to talk a little bit about what is it that's in our hearts? What's in our hearts? Here he says the word is very near you in your mouth and in your heart to do it. But I'm trying to figure out what's in your heart though. Like what's in your heart? Because when we look at I'm just gonna go to it so we could just think about that as we think about this idea here. Hold on, let me get some of this stuff. Okay, let's go over here. What is that? Matthew 12 and 33. Okay, let's read down to 37.
Either make the tree good and its fruit good, or else make the tree rotten and its fruit rotten. For a tree is known by its fruits. Brood of adders, how are you able to speak what is good, being wicked? For the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart. The good man brings forth what is good from the good treasures of his heart, and the wicked man brings forth what is wicked from the wicked treasure. And I say to you that for every idle word men speak, they shall give an account of it in the day of judgment. For by your words you shall be declared righteous, and by your words you shall be declared unrighteous.
Okay, I wanted to focus on this part right here, this highlighted portion here.
For the mouth speaks from overflow of the heart.
Right, so from the mouth speaks from the overflow of your heart. The things those things which you say is the things that's really coming out of your heart. Right? That's what's in your heart, the things that you say, the things that you talk about. If all you talking about is whatever it is that you always talking about, that's the stuff that's in your heart, right? Okay, so we're gonna go back. We're gonna go back and look at some things because when we look back and Moses is talking about this idea of these commandments not being too hard and they're near to you, he ends up getting to the fact that this word is very near you in your mouth and in your heart that you may observe it. So these commandments, these laws that the Most High has put in there for the people to walk in is near to them because it's in their mouth and it's in their heart. So therefore, they're able to do it. So we want to build on that thought as we look at Psalms, Psalms 2 and 1. Book of Psalms, chapter 2, verse 1. What says, what it say?
Why do the nations rage and the peoples meditate emptiness?
Okay, verse 1, right? So these people, we want to look at this word here. Why do the nations rage and the peoples meditate emptiness? The meditations. King James says, and the people imagine a vain thing. This is a word here. Meditate. To murmur, pleasure or anger, to ponder, imagine, meditate, mourn, mutter, roar, soar, speak, study, talk, utter. So think about we think about meditating sometimes, talking about murmuring, not necessarily how you sit around and kind of, well, if you was to murmur, like sometimes kids might just murmur against their parents, like the parents tell them something, they saying something under their breath. All right. Right, how you sitting there murmuring, you sitting there saying whatever it is you saying kind of under your breath, right? But again, when we're thinking back to what Yeshua talked about and how out of the abundance of the heart does the mouth speak, right? So you really thinking that about whatever your mom, your daddy has said to you, you saying it, but you just ain't saying it loud enough for them to hear. But we thinking about these people here who's meditating on emptiness, or they're imagining a vain thing. The heathen, right? The other version had like nations, but we talking about the other nations, right? With these vain murmurings that they're doing, these vain meditations, where out of their mouths is coming out these things, these vain things. To meditate is to dwell on anything in thought, to contemplate, to study, to turn or revolve any subject in the mind appropriately, but not exclusively used of pious contemplation or a consideration of great truths of things. Okay, so the heathen is going to meditate on vain things, right? As it's talking about here. This heathen here is going to meditate on these vain things. These are the things that's going to be kind of in the thoughts and kind of murmurings of the heathen, right? But let's look at chapter 1. Look at chapter 1 of Psalms, chapter 1 and verse let's see what verse that is. 1 through 3. Let me get another version here. Psalms 1 through 3. What'd I say?
Blessed is the man who shall not walk in the counsel of the wrong, and shall not stand in the path of sinners, and shall not sit in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the Torah, law of Yah, and he meditates in his Torah day and night. For he shall be as a tree planted by the rivers of water, that yields his fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither. And whatever he does prospers.
Okay, so here it says, right? And he meditates in his Torah day and night. Right? The things that he's murmuring, the things that this righteous man is murmuring, the thing that he's kind of speaking, the overflows of his heart is the Torah, day and night. Right? So when we think about the idea of, first of all, if we go all the way back to Deuteronomy 30 verse 11, where it's talking about this idea of the commandment which I command you today is not too difficult for you, nor is out of your reach. It's not out of your reach because it's in your heart. It's not out of your reach because you're meditating on this thing. You're murmuring it to yourself, right? It's spilling out of your heart into you in being manifest in your life, right? Oh, here's a good one here. Let's look over here into this. Let's look over it. Oh, it's right here. Look. What's that? It's a rock. Six 632.
My son, if thou wilt, thou shalt be taught. And if thou wilt apply thy mind, thou shalt be prudent. If thou love to hear, thou shalt receive understanding. And if thou bow down ear, thou shalt be wise. Stand in the multitude of the elders and cleave unto him that is wise. Be willing to hear every godly discourse, and let not the parables of understanding escape thee. If thou seest a man of understanding, get thee betimes unto him, and let thy foot wear the footsteps of his door. Let thy mind be upon the ordinances of Yahweh, and meditate continually in his commandments. He shall establish thy heart and give thee wisdom at thine own desire.
Okay, so we see here now it's kind of the other, when we look at the psalm, kind of it was like who not to be around and what not to do. And then here's kind of the opposite of that, of what to do, right? This person here being willing to hear every godly discourse, be willing to hear, right? And let not the parables of understanding escape you, right? You're able to not let them escape you. And if you're able to meditate on these things continually, right? When these things are inside of you, then they become something that's manifest on the outside, right? Your heart is able to be established when these things are the law of Yahweh, the commandments of Yahweh, his right rulings are what you are meditating on. If you're meditating on, so what you put into your heart is going to be what comes out of your heart.
Mm-hmm. It always says it doesn't matter what you put into the mouth, it matters what comes out.
Right, but the reason why that's true is because he's looking at it from a spiritual perspective, right?
Yeah, because sometimes physically what you put in your mouth can't harm you.
Right, yeah. But the mouth is a manifestation of the heart. So the truth that Yeshua was trying to put forth in terms of the fruit and the tree and that before was the fact that what comes out of your mouth is a manifestation of your heart. You know, people get that Matthew chapter 7 mixed up and think that that Yeshua is sitting up there saying that you can eat whatever you want to eat, right? But that's not what he's talking about. What he's saying is that if you was gonna eat some dirt, it's not gonna make your heart wicked. And that's what. So when we think about what this is talking about over here in Deuteronomy, we're gonna go back to Deuteronomy here in a minute. But when we think about, let me just what was that verse? 14, but the word is very nigh to thee, in thy mouth and in thy heart, that they mayest do it. So again, we think about the way that we think about the laws of Yahweh, the commandments of Yahweh, and them not being something that's afar off, and those things not being too difficult, is by them actually being in our heart and us allowing that which is in our heart to be manifest, to be made into our reality, right? So when we think about the things of our heart, it's not something like this big vault or something where you put stuff in there and lock it up and then put the key somewhere and then it's in there. Like, because when we think about what we've seen over here in these verses, this person here was like gaining things, right? Things was this thing was, he was getting understanding. He was seeing things and following things and then meditating on. It was a growth. It was a process. It was a kind of a way of life, right? It wasn't just kind of like a one-time deposit thing. So when we think about the idea of the Most High writing his laws on our hearts, it's not as if he takes all of the commandments, right, and then just writes it all on us, and then we automatically just are just doing everything, right? Because what happens is that, you know, when Paul talks about the idea of walking in the spirit, the idea of walking in the spirit, it looks like, you know, you walking in a certain way, and then by the power of the Ruach showing you, you know, oh, wait a second, this thing right here, I need to get this thing out of my life. I need to be doing this, and a continual kind of growth and progression of that spirit that's put inside of you, growing and you walking in it more and more. But when we think about this idea of meditating or murmuring on these commandments, or these commands being in your mouth, I'm saying that the only way that they're in your mouth is that they're in your heart and then being activated. Right? Not something that is, you're going to talk about and think about the things that's kind of like you know, that you put in to your situation. So when we think about this word heart, let's go back, because I know we can see the word heart back in Deuteronomy. I know what the word is, but I'm gonna put it up here. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Let's pull it up here. Okay, so this word here, let's look at it in the word study. Heart. mind, inner person, your kind of your inner self, your inner being, right? Primary usage of his words describes the entire disposition of the inner person that Elohim can discern, right? This your inner man, right? So when we think about these commandments being not hard, not too difficult, and not too far off, we think about these commandments being in your mouth and in your heart, right? You have to put them, you have to put something in your inner man in order for it to come out, right? We have to kind of become familiar with the will and the ways of the Almighty so that they can be part of our life. We have to kind of familiarize ourselves with the things that the Father likes so that those things become part of our life. And I think when we look over here at these verses over here in Deuteronomy and we see what's going on in terms of the fact that, you know, these words are near to you, in your mouth, in your heart, to do it. He's just going over all of these things in terms of having a, well, I guess I could say relationship with commands, because again, when we think about the commands of the Almighty, again, Moses was speaking of Yeshua, right? So when we look at the Torah, these law, statutes, and commands is teaching us about the Almighty. They're teaching us about what Yeshua is going to come to do in us and actually be in our hearts and in our minds and transforming us from the inside out and causing us to walk in his will and in his ways. So when we look at these laws and these commands, and we think about what's being said about them here in terms of them being in our hearts and in our mouths and meditating on these things, right? We definitely can see where Messiah fits into these things, right? Because we're supposed to walk as Messiah walked, right? He was an example for us. But not only was he that example, but he is the one who strengthens us to cause us to be able to do it. Okay, so let's look down. I want to read I want to go back to Deuteronomy and read 15 down through 18.
All right. See, I have set before you today life and good and death and evil, and that I am commanding you today to love Yahweh Elohim, to walk in his ways, and to guard his commands and his laws and his right rulings. And you shall live and increase, and Yahweh Elohim shall bless you in the land which you go to possess. But if your heart turns away, I'll say this again, but if your heart turns away and you do not obey, and shall be drawn away and shall bow down to other mighty ones and serve them, I have declared to you today that you shall certainly perish. You shall not prolong your days in the land which you are passing over the Jordan to enter and possess.
Okay, so look at the thing that turns away, right? It's the heart. If your heart turns away, that's the beginning piece. When we think about obedience, that's that manifestation. That obedience is that manifestation, right? But the first thing that got to happen is that thing that happens internally in your heart. before you are obey or disobey, it's going to be in your heart first, whether it's obeying or not obeying. Right? But the first thing that's going to happen is that heart.
That's for you. The heart that it's talking about, or I always liken that to, I just say mine. I just go right to mine. And your mind is you. That is you.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it controls, all of you for the most part. So it's it's you. But if you turns away, but I know it has to be like your motive, your mind.
It's your inner you, though.
Yeah, but then like you bringing out what you gotta feed it. Something specific.
Mm-hmm. You are what you eat.
Yeah, if you ain't feeding it the right knowledge and information,
if you sitting in the seat of the scornful, you gonna be scornful.
Right.
If you sitting around with a bunch of wicked people,
you're gonna be like them.
You're gonna be just like the wicked people.
Mm-hmm. But they say birds of a feather flock together.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then the birds that ain't like the ones that ain't like each other, they become like each other by flocking together.
Right. Company, bad company, corrupts good character.
Mm-hmm.
All those cliches is real.
Yeah. So the first thing that happens, as it says right here, is that heart, right, turning away. Thinking about turning away, I wanted to look over at this over here real quick. Because when we have a relationship with the Almighty, right? When we have a genuine kind of conversion and transformation of our heart, when our heart has been circumcised and we've been given this new heart, and these laws have been put in our hearts and in our minds, there's some things that we see over here that need to be thought about. Where they at? Right here. Right here. Let's see. Right here. Let's see here. Let's see. Oh, right here. 26. What did I say?
For if we sin purposely after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a slaughter offering for sins.
That's interesting right there, right? Because when we was looking at over here, there's a difference between what we see right here and what we saw over there in Deuteronomy chapter 30, right? Because when we think about here, obviously we're talking about the new covenant in terms of there being that spiritual transformation on the inside, right? Because it talks about the differences between what was with the it goes over the whole idea of the the continual physical offerings and the thing that Yeshua actually has done for us. But when we think about in Deuteronomy chapter 30, where it talked about this idea of repentance and turning back to the Father, if you are obedient, you will be blessed. If you are disobedient, you will be cursed. But if you're being disobedient and you turn back to the Father, then he'll receive you back again. And in fact, he talks about the curses and to the extent where the people that have been dispersed all over the place, don't matter how far away he sent you, he's gonna bring you back. Right? Is what it says, right? But here, look what it says, right? If you sin purposefully after you have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a slaughter offering for sins. There's a difference here between what we were thinking about in terms of in Deuteronomy 30 and this right here. So I'm saying, what's the difference?
What I get out of it is, if you commit these acts and therefore there is no covering for sins for you or no forgiveness of sins, man, ain't that an equivalent of a reprobated man or something? And if you think about it, if we sin purposely after we have received the knowledge of the truth, in other words, you know how the scriptures talk about those who will go astray after hearing the truth and embracing the truth, they will go astray and exchange the truth for a lie and get itching ears, etc., etc. You know, it reminds me of that, which I did a post about that earlier. It said, there's no longer remains slaughtering offerings for sin. In other words, there's no longer remains a means of forgiving. You know, it's pretty deep, and it's real crucial that people understand that, because this type of sinning is in contrast with sinning ignorantly. So when people say all sin is sin, it tells you right there, it separates it. It says this type of sinning. You understand? So this type of sin stands alone among the rest of them. This type of sinning is in contrast with sinning ignorantly. That's deep right there, you know? And they can cross-reference that with Hebrews 9:7, Numbers 15 to 28. You know, it's very interesting. So that goes to show you that y'all is not playing, man. Y'all is not playing with his people, man. He wants us to come back to him wholeheartedly, not straddling the fence. He wants us to hope, just like the scripture says, man. If we like warm water, he's going to spew us out of his mouth, man. We either hot or cold. Playtime is over. Which I try to stress to most people. Playtime is over. Do we slip up? Yes. This is why we repent and die daily. No one's perfect. But it tells you right there, if we sin purposely after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there is no longer remains a slaughtering offering for sins. Perhaps you need to look that up under a different version so people can get a more better understanding of no longer remains a slaughter offering for sins. You understand?
There's nothing that could be done for you.
That is
basically
true. That is true.
There's nothing that could be done for you.
But you know how some people,
once you get to the place of whatever this is talking about, there's no longer a slaughter offering for you. The thing that Yeshua did
does not matter
for you is no longer applicable to your situation.
So that'd be equivalent to a reprobated man then.
I guess.
Blaspheming in the Ruach.
I guess so.
Yeah.
I guess there's, when you think about the things that where it talks about, if you're in a place where you're beyond forgiveness, I mean, I guess you could call it that. But I think that it's important when we look at this to understand that when we think about this idea here in Hebrews 10:26, for if we sin purposefully, this is willing, but like in the Greek is this present active participle. So in other words, it's kind of a continual thing. It's kind of like how it talks about in it's the same thing that we see in First John chapter 3 verse 9, where it says, whosoever is born of Elohim does not commit sin. It's the same thing.
Right.
As if it's this present active participle. That is not your current situation. If your kind of present reality is doing sin, you couldn't be born of Elohim. You must not be. Right? But that's different from, because in the same book it's talking about he who is without sin is a liar. Right? So there's a difference between there must be a time when you would transgress. So this can't be saying that whoever does a sin is not born of Elohim. Right. Can't be saying that, because it just told you that if you say that you don't have sin, that you a liar. But what it is saying is, if your present reality is always sin,
yeah,
if that's your reality, you're not born of Elohim.
right.
So the same thing is true with this Hebrews 10:26, was talking about if you sin purposefully, or if you willingly, or if you're willingly presently in sin, there no longer remains an offering for you.
That's very, very interesting, very frightful, and I'm just saying, it's a wake-up call, man. It's definitely an eye-opener.
But the thing about it is that when we also think about what we looked at earlier in First John chapter 5, if I'm born of Elohim, I keep his commandments. Like, I want to do those things which are pleasing to the Almighty.
That is true.
If I purposefully don't want to do those things which are pleasing to the Almighty, that puts me in another category, don't it? Like, it's proof that you are born of Elohim when you want to walk in the will and the ways of the Almighty. When you don't do those things purposefully, it's proof that you're not. So when we think about this, and when you think about this whole idea of being this reprobate, we who have been joined to the Messiah, this is not something that like, we're separated from this. We're separated from this because of the experience that we have had with the Messiah, right? Because when I think about where was that at in when John talks about these people over here that he calls Antichrist, right? When he calls them Anti-Messiah in verse chapter 2, little children, it is the last time, as you have heard, that Antichrist shall come, Anti-Messiah shall come. Even now are there many Anti-Messiahs, whereby we know that is the last time. They went out from us, but they were not of us. For if they had been of us, they would no doubt have continued with us, but they went out that they might be made manifest that they were not all of us. So when we think about, again, this goes back to the idea of people's hearts and the manifestations of their hearts when we think about this whole idea of being reprobate and all this, at the end of the day, it's really just a manifestation of your heart. If you're able to get to the place where you're able to turn from the knowledge of the truth, I don't know that you properly received the knowledge of the truth in the first place. If we,
What if you receive knowledge of truth and you just ain't take heed? You did the same thing. You just
it didn't really take root in your situation. I feel like Yeshua talks about this perfectly when he talks about the sower and the seed. That seed that's planted in the good ground that gets root, that thing gonna grow.
maybe you can't receive it because you know that everybody can't receive it.
Everybody can't receive it. But what I'm saying is that the one that the seed goes in that good ground, that one grows and there's no problems with it. But the other one that talks about that falls on the shallow ground that has these little light roots, when the thing come around, they could just pluck it up.
Yeah.
So it did grow some little light roots, but it got plucked up. To me, I feel like that's this right here. It received the knowledge of the truth, but it got plucked up because it didn't have nowhere to grow at. It didn't grow. But again, it did, so it didn't really have the relationship was never really solidified. Right? Okay, so so let's go back. Let's go back over here. Let's go back over here. Verse was that? Okay, so again, when we think about these matters of the heart, again, we have to understand this, or the inner man, right, or the inner self, or or even your mind, right? We have to be able to when we look at how these ones are being described in terms of, again, the word being near, the word being in your mouth, the word being in your heart, right? These commandments and all of these things being laid out before you, right? We have to be living a life where these ways of righteousness, these ways of Messiah is what takes up the majority of our lives. The things that fills our heart must be Messiah. Messiah must be who fills up our heart, right? Because again, you're gonna find out whenever the rubber meets the road, when it becomes time for everything's all good when you don't have any adversity, right? But soon as these different challenges come about, whatever those things may be, you're gonna find out where you're at in terms of your walk with Messiah. And you either gonna talk against them or you gonna talk for them. There's gonna be some murmuring going on, but it's either gonna be blessings or curses, right? And the thing that's going to determine that is if we have continually have a steady diet of Yeshua and his will and his ways. And I think that that's what we see when we look at this whole idea of again, we look at this from a physical perspective with the ancient Israel walking. They continually have, especially here anyway, these words being spoken to them, right? But we have to be able to, in our lives, to be able to find ways to kind of stir up the the ways of the Almighty in our lives, in our heart, and in our minds, so that His will and His ways are what is manifest in our lives. We have so much interaction with with the world and with the ways of the world and in the place that we're in, where there's so much kind of opportunity for that outside influence to be the thing that kind of dictates our lives. But we have to be able to kind of maintain that counterbalance in our situation, so that the thing that comes out, and I'm saying come out of our mouth in terms of being the way in which we deal with things, how we interact with people, and how we respond to adversity, has to be, we have to be able to have Messiah ready to come into action in our hearts and in our minds, so that we don't end up like these people who were drawn away. And we do have that advantage of having that circumcised heart. We do have that advantage of that Ruach HaKodesh living and dwelling on the inside of us, but that spirit has to be fed. That spirit has to be nurtured. Just like we read over before in terms of, there has to be that kind of positive input to kind of when we think about the idea of the spirit being like a seed and water being poured onto it, right? This word is like water, right? And we grow by this word actually being poured into us. So again, kind of wrapping this all up, when we think about this initial thing that we looked at up here in verse 11, talking about the idea of these commandments not being too hard and not being far off. The way that they're not hard is that we keep in the will and the ways of the Almighty kind of ever present in our situation, right? Feeding ourselves with a steady diet of Yeshua and His commands, the things that He would have for us to do, the way in which He would have for us to live. Just like how Moses was able to say to them people where, they forever had the words in their heart and in their mouths. We also have to be like that people where, these are the things that are on our minds. If we were to get to the place where our mind starts to wander into these other places, we have to be able to recognize those moments and go to this map, right, to pull us back in, right?
That remind me of what's that? Ecclesiasticus, sir. I think it's second chapter. That's what you just said. Yeah. Starting at the top. Sarah chapter 2, verse 1. It says, My son, if thou come to serve Yahweh, prepare thy soul for temptation, set thy heart aright, and constantly endure, and make not haste in time of trouble. Cleave unto him, and depart not away, that thou mayest be increased in thy last end. For whatsoever is brought upon thee, take cheerfully, and be patient, but now change to a low estate. For gold is tried in the fire, and acceptable men in the furnace of adversity. Believe in him, and he will help thee. Order thy way aright, and trust in him. Ye that fear Yahweh, wait for his mercy, and go not aside, lest ye fall. For ye that fear Yahweh, believe him, and your reward shall not fail. Ye that fear Yahweh, yea, the fear of Yahweh, hope for is good, and for everlasting joy and mercy. And it goes on, but that's pretty much just the point.
Right.
What you just said.
So at the end of the day, we would just say that this life has to be kind of this ever growing type of a situation where we're forever kind of interacting with the will of the Almighty. We're always kind of mingling in our situation the law of Yahweh, right? We're always kind of intermixing into our lives and our situation those things which are pleasing to the Almighty, understanding that our standard for life is the Torah, right? Being pleasing to the Father, walking in his will and his ways, and this being actually the desire of our hearts to do this. Okay, so again, thinking about these things in terms of Messiah, in terms of Yeshua, he is not far off, right? These things are not too hard. You got these people out here who try to talk to you about you trying to keep the commandments. Nobody can't do that perfectly. I thought they say that. Nobody can't walk perfectly in the commandments. So that's my excuse not to do it because nobody's perfect. That's silly. That doesn't make any sense, right?
It's like you gotta commit now.
I don't gotta do nothing. Yeah. But the Most High said to Moses, this thing's not too difficult. But he also tells us how it's not difficult, right? By, allowing Messiah, allowing the Most High to kind of be the motivator, the instigator, the one that's pushing us forward. If we look at how Israel was successful in their successes, the key factor is the Most High, right? The people was never this mighty people. They was always lesser than the people who they was going against. The great equalizer was the Almighty. The same thing is true for us in this life that we live. It don't have nothing to do with our righteousness. It's always about Yeshua in us and our ability only to trust in him and allow him to be manifest in our lives so that we are able to walk victoriously. Okay, that being said, does anybody have any final thoughts on the matter?
Hey, choose life this day. Who you would choose to serve. You know, that's the bottom line. The common denominator is we need Yeshua to get into the kingdom. And we don't just need grace, because faith without works is indeed dead. And what Paul meant by, there's another verse that talks about works, faith and not needing works, which means that we don't have to partake in sacrificial offers of things or work towards things like in the dialogue of Catholicism. They got all these rules, purgatory, this, that. You got to do this. You got to tithe. You got to do this in order to get in the kingdom of heaven. Nah, that's the wrong type of work it's talking about. With that aspect, you don't need it. But with the aspects of operating in your faith, you must do work regarding keeping the teachings of Yeshua, regarding loving your brother. You know, so there is work to resolve around faith. You just can't have plain faith as you just sit in a chair and just know it's going to sit there and not break on you. That type of faith. You got to do work. And even when you do that, you're doing work because your butt is sitting down in it. So you're working. So choose life over death, people. Shabbat shalom.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess the last thing that that Moshe was saying over there in that chapter there, well, I guess start going into the next chapter, it's telling the people, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. Right? But remembering that our strength is not in our own strength. Our strength is in the Almighty. Right? So if all we're able to do is have faith in what the Father is able to do, that's kind of saying a lot right there. Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna go out on that note, and y'all willing, we will be back with the next chapter on next Shabbat. Okay, all right. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody. Have a y'all night.